morning. Thanks for getting up early. So, my idea, as Joel was saying, was just to have this be interactive. So it's going to be question-led the entire time, and we can go anywhere, but not necessarily for too long, because I want to be able to have a lot of people get their questions on the floor. And this is about me learning from you, too. This isn't, you've got the questions and I've got all the answers. I've got questions, too, and when other people ask questions, you may have some answers there. I'm really humbly aware of the intelligence and experience in this room, and today is about accessing that. So I want to start by just mentioning a couple of things as a context. Yesterday, Mary Ruart asked you some questions, and I asked you some questions, and we went into our presentations, and then we had a discussion in the evening, and fortunately, disagreement came up, which is fantastic. It needs to. And personally, they've called me the question guy since I was in elementary school. I'm obsessed with asking questions about how things work. And it's led me down a lot of rabbit holes, and it's been very rewarding. So I've always learned best, I notice, from hearing so-called experts with real experience, real information, who disagree with each other. And that's why I treasured what was happening on the panel last night. And when Danny and I get together in Santa Cruz, we're not playing golf. We're doing this. And it's really helpful to learn from one another, to have people who are listening learn and participate, but also just to build this muscle of having respectful disagreement. Because without it, we're going to be in a civil war, and we know where that goes to. When it happened in Spain, it led quite quickly to Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler. The thing just spread across Europe. It's very, very dangerous times that we're in if we can't be talking. I had lunch with a couple of dear friends in Ashland on Friday when I got here early. And they're dyed-in-the-wool Ashland progressives, and they love Kimberly and me, and we've been in intense dialogue with them for probably 2 years about the whole liberty perspective and so forth. They're brilliant people who really want to engage in the dialogue. And it's been powerful enough for them that they have been wading out into trying on the conversation about what they're learning with their colleagues in Ashland. And they said it's been brutal. First of all, because they're really excited about certain things, but they haven't been studying it for 10 years. So immediately questions come up, well, what about the sick and what about the poor and who's going to do the roads and security? And they haven't necessarily thought through or really studied those answers. So they've said, we're not able to really represent that perspective very well yet. And that's one of the challenges. It takes a lot of time to have the kind of knowledge that Mary was representing yesterday and over dinner with other people who were asking questions is hard won, but to me, it's truly the path of liberation. And they said also that they're really afraid, even with their dearest friends, to bring up the possibility of something that is not progressive politics, because they will be slammed. They have been. I personally have, lost friendships, relationships, over not agreeing with. I'm in Santa Cruz. It's like another Ashland, and so the ability to be having the discussion that can move beyond for everyone it's a survival skill. And so I want to be working on that today and just have a really fruitful discussion about all these different topics and learn from each other. So the last thing, when I asked you to think about something last night, what I asked you to think about was, where might there be inconsistencies in your worldview, in your life, that you might not want to have continue? And I think one of the reasons why both Mary and I ended up asking questions yesterday was just to help reveal inconsistencies if they're there for you. And I noticed a few, because I was paying attention to the audience during hers, and then observing when I was asking the questions, and here's a few of the things that I noticed. When she asked people if you believe that the ends justify the means, essentially nobody raised their hand. When she was talking about, can we get to a peaceful society through violent means? Nobody thought that was really going to work. When she said, are you in favor of having the majority rule, the minority rule, or ruling yourselves? Almost everyone said ourselves. And that, to me, creates a potential inconsistency. Because when we asked about your political affiliation, it was over 90% liberal. And that means that you're actually voting and giving your money to regimes which are using violent means to operate. Because, one of the real challenges of this path is that 2 and 2 is 4. It just keeps coming out 4. No matter how long somebody tries to convince you. I mean, if they start, in a very authoritarian way, when you're in kindergarten, by the time you graduate high school, you might be able to buy into that it's 5. If you really think taxes aren't theft, but Mary took you through the steps yesterday of where essentially everyone said, no, I don't think it's okay for someone to hire someone else or get a majority vote in order to steal from someone. That's exactly what it is, no matter what kind of justification we put on it. And it was one of the hard things for me to wrestle with, and I see that it is for everyone. So I'm paying taxes, about to pay a lot of taxes in a few days, and I hate it. It's the worst day of the year for me because there's so many better things that I could do with that money. But I have to give it over to the state. And as far as I can tell, the state is a fiction. There are people, there are buildings, there's suits and lapel pins and guns and so forth. But the state itself is kind of like addition. It's not a real thing. It's an abstraction, and it can be a useful abstraction, but it can also be a really dangerous abstraction if we forget that that's what it is, because we start giving rights, to the state, and the state makes corporations, and then we give, rights to them as if they were real beings. So we're all essentially paying taxes to go to wars, to bailouts, to this fake interest on the Federal Reserve. So for me, that's an inconsistency. I really don't like that, and I'm working as hard as I can to reconcile that. Meanwhile, I'm paying taxes because I think I'm more effective out here than I would be in jail. But it's an inconsistency. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. When I asked how many people would support putting me in jail for not paying taxes, I was thrilled to see that nobody in the room raised their hand. However, your actions are in support of regimes, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, libertarian, whatever, who would put me in jail for not paying taxes. So that's another really big inconsistency that we're living with that points out that, yes, in fact, somebody has created a system where we have to give away our money and our power to do these things which virtually everyone said is not morally okay with them, nor strategically. So we got some inconsistencies. So I want to ask this question. If there were a way, without violence, without initiating force, without fraud or theft, to actually have good health care and good roads and security and effective conflict resolution and prosperity, would you want that? Yes. Fantastic. Well, then we're on the same page. That's the context I wanted to set for today. We're all in this dilemma. In fact, somebody gave me just before I walked up here, a question. He says, I believe we're on the Titanic. I believe we here at ANP might be rearranging the deck chairs. Do you, as a panelist, assume humanity has a series of problems to be solved, or do you assume we're in a predicament? My question for you is, do you believe we're on the Titanic? And I do believe we're on pretty much the equivalent of the Titanic, but we haven't actually hit the iceberg yet. There is time. And I did my best to lay out yesterday what I thought the source of the problems. Virtually every problem is the breakdown of wholeness of a natural system. And in my research, I was horrified to find out that virtually every one of those breakdowns is intentional on the behalf of a very small psychopathic percentage of humanity, which has taken over all of the power centers and actually running it in secret societies behind the banks and the corporations and the government and the military and so forth. And the good news is that there aren't that many of them. And the only way that they get their power through their banks and the military and the government and so forth is if we give it to them. So as people are waking up, that power is dissipating and they know it. They're desperately trying to hang on to it right now. Honey, I can't do it right. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I do think that we've got a series of problems, but I think that the usefulness of a meeting like this is that we can get to the principles that we're not aligned with that are causing those problems. We can also name names and institutions and understand the strategy of how those problems are being intentionally created, and we can also organize along the lines of the torus and the vector equilibrium, like I was laying out yesterday, to be super effective in solving each one of those problems based on the same principles. That's the main common denominator. So I don't think some people may be involved in efforts that I would say are rearranging the deck chairs. I don't think anybody's doing that intentionally. I think it's a matter of just learning more and more what's really going on and how can we be effective. The one person got irate last night about didn't want our time at ANP to be going into political discussions when it could be going into consciousness. And I think that's an important point to bring up. I think it's a misunderstanding. For me, one of our script editors on Thrive, I don't know how many of you, particularly from California, know Neil Rogan. He's one of the most, does anybody know Neil? Okay, a few, yeah. Probably one of the 2 or 3 most eloquent men I've ever met, and a really brilliant guy. And as he was getting exposed to the information of Thrive, he's deeply involved in the consciousness movement and the transformation. No, you're not supposed to be doing that. You can't turn it off. Yeah, right. Next time I'll start dancing to that music. But anyway, I think where that gets resolved is Neil said to me as he was starting to get exposed to the information of Thrive, which was challenging for him, but he was ultimately really glad. He said, I'm realizing it's not enough just to be more conscious. It really matters, especially in this time, what you're becoming conscious of. And to me, that's the reconciliation of that last night. I don't think we were having a political discussion like some of the disagreements between Danny and me. I'm not very interested in political discussions myself. That should be clear by now. But I'm really interested in the discussion about transcending politics and actually doing solutions based on principles rather than politics. And I think that that's what we're doing here at ANP. The fact that Jordan invited me back for a second year and invited Mary and so forth, I think it's really encouraging as to the different points of view that are getting represented here. And it's my intention that this brainstorm now be just respectfully honoring that kind of conversation. Okay, so with that said, I would invite anyone who has a question or a comment to come up to the microphone there, and let's dive in.
Hi, local here at Cave Junction.
Would you introduce yourself, please?
Nicolette Pavlivsky.
Hi, Nicolette.
And I've been wrestling with this concept for a very long time and thought I was writing a book about something that nobody else knew about, and then I found out everybody else knew about it. And so I'm really glad to know that I'm not in a vacuum after all. And a lot of my work that I did on my own through my channeling ended up being what everybody else is already writing about. So
through channeling, you said?
Yeah, a lot of mine came from channeling.
Okay.
I was channeling without knowing about Neil Donald Walsh, and then after 2 years of channeling, I found out about Neil Donald Walsh.
Yeah.
And so then I found out about everything else. And I've traveled the country doing UFO conferences, conspiracy conferences for 6 years. traveling the country, one conference after another
Oh,
for
thank
6
you.
months out of the year. And so my concepts really came down to realizing that what we have to do is educate our children about this love principle. If we educate our children, then what we can do is generationally change the paradigm shift through our children. I don't think we're going to go out there and say, hey, there's this new paradigm, you got to get on board, and most people are not going to be able to do that. We can't just suddenly not pay our taxes, and we can't just suddenly say, bye regime, we don't want you around anymore. We just can't do that. But if we educate our children, the star children that are being born, that already know something's wrong with this system, and they get these principles of emotional intelligence and love is the answer and all that other stuff in their schools. If we can get that program of this paradigm shift in the schools and make it a very important aspect of their learning so that they don't have to go through a messed up life and then learn it through therapy later on in their life,
Right.
then generationally we can make the change. You have to change the people's mind before you can change the systems that those minds make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, thank you, Nicolette, and thanks for the good work you've been doing. In the Thrive Solutions movement, we came across a distinction which has really helped people to relax and be more effective, which is that they can choose what sector or sectors they want to work in, but also in the diagram that I showed yesterday, there's 3 concentric toruses. And the outer one is immediate needs. There's some people who really want to be on the line at the pipeline, or they're in a soup kitchen, or they're doctoring in Africa or something like that. And that's just the right level of engagement, we call it, for them. There are other people for whom that's not the thing. What they want to, they're drawn to systems thinking. So they want to work on policies. And if you can improve a system in a community, whether it's a water system or a governance system or a media system or whatever it is, you can affect positively a lot of immediate needs just by having a more effective system. But behind every system, we call that the systemic change level of engagement, behind every system is a worldview. And particularly in audiences like this, we've done solution summits all over the world, and we ask people what sector and what level of engagement. And particularly in communities like this, it's almost all the third level, which is worldview, which we call the consciousness shift. So you're really interested in the spirituality, in the philosophy, in altering, as you're saying, the worldview, not only your own, but of those around you, in ways that is more accurate, that is more aligned with the principles of nature, so that then the systems that get designed are more accurate and aligned with the principles of nature, so that it's better meeting the immediate needs. I personally love when any of this stuff gets into schools. The Thrive, a lot of the Thrive curriculum would be very challenging for public schools to take on. Because when you're challenging the very existence of government schools don't like that a whole lot. However, somebody came up to me yesterday after my talk, and introduce yourself if you're here. It was a woman who teaches in high school. What's your name? Michelle. And she told me that she brought Thrive and then other videos from the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library into her high school and got a really positive response. Yeah. Yeah, and so I told her that I did a tour in Australia, and this guy approached me who saw Thrive, dropped out of a very lucrative financial career, and started writing. And he's completed now a trilogy of novels based on the premise that a woman high school teacher brings Thrive into her classroom. Yeah, and chaos and a lot of good conversations, and then ultimately effective things ensue. So yeah, to whatever, I mean, I've done Skype calls into classes, philosophy classes, economics, political classes in universities around the country. It occasionally happens. You have to find the right person. There's a guy at the University of Colorado, Garrett Modell, who's teaching a postgraduate course in free energy, in the theories of free energy. And there's a professor named Michael Huemer wrote this book called The Problem of Political Authority, where he's laid out the whole thing about security that I was talking about yesterday, the whole rise of the predator class. He's laid this out in, thick, intense academic language, but he's done it. Nobody had ever done that in my experience before. So he's done that. There's another guy, Bruce Benson, did The Enterprise of Law. This is all about how the subtitle is Justice Without the State, and he lays out the whole history, the philosophy, the logic of how it can work, how it is working in some places already without the state. So yeah, wherever you've got some leverage and can bring in new ideas, please go for it, and then let us know. We'll report on it to our network because it really inspires everyone else. Next one.
Good morning, everybody.
Hi, what's your name?
My name is Daniel Mark. I'm the founder and director of Peaceful Interfaith Creations. I've got a booth set up over here. After 14 years of living in the Middle East, I wrote a book called In One Spirit, An Interfaith Approach to Peace and Wellness. And my question for you is how much the Thrive movement has given thought to Jerusalem and how Jerusalem fits into the new paradigm.
We have on our website, we've got a landing page for every sector. And then we've got like a mission for every sector. We've got the problems that are in the way. We've got strategies, solution stories, and at least one article. The briefest sector is literally only like a 1 or 2 page article, which is on spirituality. We don't go into religion at all except to say that according to what we believe are the natural principles, we need to honor each other's belief, whatever it is, as long as it's not initiating harm toward anyone. So I don't think you'd find anything specifically about Jerusalem. I'm not sure whether you're talking about about moving the capital of Israel back there now, or you're talking more in religious terms.
I'm talking about a resolution to the conflict over there, really.
Yeah.
And in my book, I have a proposal called Sharing Jerusalem, the Home and Garden Peace Plan.
Yeah.
So I look at the Old City as a mansion, and the areas in East Jerusalem around the Old City as a garden, and how that space can be used in a win-win solution.
Yeah. Well, I've got this penchant for following the money, and if you follow back the history of Israel, it's pretty ugly. I mean, I totally honor the Jewish religion and Hebrew people and all the different bloodlines that have come into there and so forth. But the long and short of it is that Israel was the creation of the Rothschilds to create a center in the Middle East from which they could take over the Middle East and then run the world, basically, from a banking system out of there. And so it was a huge act of terrorism in my research, unless somebody can correct me, to displace the Palestinian people in the way they have, and then to continue the kind of genocide, the concentration camp type area that's there. So once again, if you trace back into the principles of the whole thing, it's like, are we going to have a one-state solution or a two-state solution? How about a no-state solution? How about we've got human beings with individual rights, and those are protected by independent, not military, not state-sponsored military organizations, and the disputes are resolved on an individual basis, constantly setting precedent for future disputes, but all based on the non-aggression principle rather than what kind of thousands of laws some regime could impose during their reign. So I don't think that the issue of the one or two state solution is going to be resolved until individual rights are the basis of the strategy of solution. But I would like to hear from the guy who asked the question. I would love to hear what your strategy would be. He's going back to the mic.
I love what you're saying. I agree with you 100% that individual rights count. I think that the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, the United Nations, the United States, Russia, China, they're not ready to give up their statehood, but I think that we're heading in the right direction.
Great. Thank you very much.
My name's Joanne, and I'm one of the people who identified myself as liberal yesterday rather than the full full length that you've gone, because I just haven't gotten there yet. So where I am, the big question in my head is, well, I see that taxation is stealing. What about taxation with representation?
Well, the representation seems to me a secondary point to the stealing. The question that Mary was asking the other day, if you could get a majority of your community to authorize you to hire someone to go to your neighbor and steal, would it be okay? It sounds a little better, but if you go to the core, one of the reasons governments have never ever worked, every single one has gone corrupt, become tyrannical, and then we have the revolution, then we have the new regime. One of the reasons is that right at the core, there's no government that survives except by taking money against their will, in most cases from their people. So it literally, the whole notion of the authoritarian state is corrupt at its foundation. So all of the, I've got a blog on our website called The Myth of Enlightened Leadership. Because when I talk to Danny and other dear friends that I have who are on the left or on the right, their usual refrain is, no, you don't understand, we just need to get the right leaders in there. And if you get an enlightened person to run the mafia, I don't think it's going to go well. I was approached to run on 3 different presidential campaigns this year. For an independent, I was asked to run as a vice presidential candidate with Jill Stein on the Green Party, and then also on the Libertarian ticket. And I said to each of the people who approached me, I said, I'm really genuinely honored by the invitation, because I know what that means to you, to ask me to do that. I said, but go back and review chapter 4 of Thrive, and you'll see that not only on a practical level do I think I can be more effective when I'm a sovereign being just communicating, but also the notion that I would be, even if I were to get elected, I would be the head mafia don. And I would be in a totally corrupt system where I would wake up every morning with what I know, knowing that I was stealing from everyone, and I wasn't going to be able to follow my principles if I couldn't get a bunch of politicians, a majority of them, to agree with me. It would be, I've had dreams like this. It would be a total nightmare. Because I was always president of my class and all that stuff before I understood politics. And so I don't think that that even with like the representation, like a republic, that it will ever work. And it's been tried in all different sorts of ways. Churchill said what did he say? The democracy is the worst governmental system except all the other ones. And I think he's right, but what he didn't say was, if we're actually choosing to do something that is really bad, then how about if we look to see how could we make a choice that wouldn't have to be dancing with any devil? How about you? What do you think about that?
I'm thrilled to be exposed to your ideas, and I mean, it sounds wonderful, but the word utopia comes to my mind, and I say, at where I am on the path here, way behind there, but I say utopia. That's wonderful. Is it possible, really?
Yeah. Well, that's a really great question, because that was a big one for me when I started getting introduced to this as well. And I want to be clear that my concept, and I think Mary's as well, is not that all of a sudden everybody's going to be enlightened, so we're going to get along, so this freedom thing is going to work. It's actually quite the opposite. If one is humble enough to recognize, yeah, there are bad actors in our society, then the single worst thing that we could do is create a centralization of power and money and put it in their hands, which is exactly where we are. So if you get rid of that power, Danny and I debated on a panel last year at the ANP, where I was talking about getting rid of the power structures that give anybody the power to abuse like that. And he goes, no, wait a minute. No, we need to keep those power structures. It's just we need to control those power structures. And I really get that he means it. And he's as good-hearted a person as I've ever met, and dedicated his entire life to justice. And from my point of view, structurally, that's missing the essence of true freedom. And he's I'm sure he's having nightmares now because the power structure is in hands that is his worst nightmare.
Yeah.
So it's always going to be like that for probably about 49% of the people. And those are just amongst the voters. You know, there's something like 75% aren't even voting now. They're so disenchanted, but for the most part, they haven't been exposed to this alternative that would literally empower them and every other individual without having to all the problems with the state. We'll talk in a moment about how to transition from here to there, because we're not just going to wake up in the morning and everybody's in a stateless, free utopian society. But we can transition from here to there. I think if we're going to survive, we need to transition from here to there. And I'll also show you some success stories of just examples of where it's already happening, because people think, oh, this couldn't possibly be. Right. But the more that any community moves in the direction of economic and political freedom, the more prosperous, happy and secure they are consistently. There's a thing called the Economic Freedom of the World report that comes out every year and ranks all the countries. And it's a direct correlation. Lots of evidence, and Mary was citing some of that yesterday as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Morning, Grant Elder from Quebec, Canada.
Hi, Grant.
I'd like to come back on the point from last night. It seems to me always that we're fighting over the same bone, which is money. At the middle, we've got the left and right having two different approaches. You've got the people who want to have public benefit. We have people who want to have public benefits, and then we want liberty on the other side, and we have this all fight over this pot of money in the middle. And for me, there's been a solution we've seen over and over again. That's the Commonwealth. To me, what's important is who's generating the money and how we're putting it into the system. And in a not-so-distant future, we're going to have a lot fewer jobs, and we're really going to be fighting over the bones, because every year I just see jobs getting wiped out in all sectors because of robotics and information technology. And in the case of Canada, for example, in the past we had a country of 24 million up to the end of World War II. We had almost zero debt. It was not even $3 billion. And then we had a prime minister come in and put us into the international banking system in 1974. Our debt is now $1 trillion. We can't even service our debt, basically. And that's because we had a thing called the Bank of Canada. And the Bank of Canada was created so that when you have economic activity, the sum is always greater than the activity itself. Meaning you generate $1 here and $1 there. You can actually put money into the system, and the government's job was, through the Bank of Canada, putting that money into play into society. So we built railroads, auto routes, everything across the country, massive infrastructure for such a small population, and we weren't in debt. And that's because there was this public thing called the Commonwealth that was being created by the government, put into good value for the people, and that created a very prosperous society until we got into the international banking system in 1974. Full battle to go against that right now. The United States was the same thing. So when I hear the debate between, we have this money and we don't have enough money in government to do public service, I think we can do both. I think we can stop taxation, have a formula, not of people deciding, but a formula saying, if we've had so much economic activity in this year, we should be able to put this much new cash into the system to the public purpose. I don't see why we couldn't do that.
Okay. Yeah, Grant has written a wonderful book called, I think it's Wiki versus the New World Order.
Correct.
Is that right?
That's it.
And he's got some very well thought out strategies for, somebody was talking about the representation before, for using software to connect people in really intimate and comprehensive ways in order to have the will of the people reflected more in, so we were discussing this last night because he had sent me some materials on it. And for me, things like that are fantastic in transition. Ultimately, the kind of prosperity that the Commonwealth Fund, let me just ask you, the Commonwealth Fund, where did that money come from? Is that taxation?
No. We create value as a society all the time. As soon as we start working, we're creating value. You have to put money into the system continuously. You have to inflate the monetary system consistently. If you leave it fixed, there won't be enough money to go around. So the problem today is that it's being inflated by the Federal Reserve, and the way it's being put into use doesn't bring future value. You're buying bombs and tanks. In the 1930s and 40s, America was building infrastructure. All the power plants I worked at dated from the late 1930s, early 1940s. They're still functioning today. And all those decades, they created a tremendous economic value and benefit to people that created further economic value and keeps the wheel spinning. If you had people, the people could decide on your budget and said, we're not going to spend on military, we're going to spend on infrastructure and things that bring future value, that's an investment. It's a capital investment in the future. And as that generates more value, it creates more dollars. You have to inflate your economic system. It goes to the people.
I still don't quite understand that. You were talking about a Commonwealth fund, because I'm not familiar with that, in Canada, that was generating prosperity.
Yeah.
Is that
so,
right?
Yeah.
And where did that money for that fund come from?
The Bank of Canada created money, put it into the system. And it
Okay.
at a
All right.
rate that doesn't devalue the dollar, right? If you go too fast, if you don't have enough economic activity and you inflate it too fast, you devalue people's dollar. So your dollar that was paying for bananas at 10 cents, that dollar is now paying for bananas at 90 cents a pound. You're losing value. But if it's a formula that reflects the growth in economic activity, if everybody's sitting down, you can't increase the amount of money. But if everybody's working, is generating economic activity, you should be able to inflate the monetary, the quantity of money, and then the government puts it back into the economy for the public benefit.
Yeah, this is the notion that Ellen Brown and the public banking works with as well, that if there's a government that controls the money supply but actually has it based on goods and services that are being generated in the society, then you've simply got, in a sense, a flexible credit system which can be effective. And I think that can be a really valid transition strategy. I think ultimately when you've got a credit system in the hands of a few rulers, it's never ever going to work in the long run. I think the only thing that's ever going to work is a free market in everything.
I wouldn't put it into their hands. I would put formulas in place.
What's that?
The creation of the amount of money has to be based on a formula of economic activity. It has to be mathematical, not opinions. Because we know how that works. They decrease the amount of money in the system today to create a recession, and then they repossess everybody's goods, and that's why you see the middle class disappearing, right? They're using it as a tool to pump the economy and then suck everybody's value. That's clear as can be.
Right.
But if you have a calculation, you say, this is how much economic activity we can measure, then it becomes, this is how much money was created, and then this is your budget. This is what you got to play with this year, boys and girls.
Yeah.
Now, what do you want to do with it? You want to buy tanks, or you want to buy power plants, or invest in clean technology? I think if everybody had a say on the budget and it was put before them, it'd be really quick turnaround. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, that's why, to me, that's an improvement, a vast improvement over the current system. But ultimately, even if somebody's doing it mathematically, if you're trying to control an economy and create a money supply, rather than let nature do that itself through the pricing system. The pricing system, in my experience, and both Mises and Rothbard just laid this out in great detail. The only thing that distributes goods and services in a purely natural and ultimately effective way in my studies is a natural pricing system. So you can't fix wages, you can't fix prices, you can't arbitrarily control the money supply. But if you have real money that's based on real assets, real gold, silver, crops, water, and so forth, if it's actually related to commodities, the value of the money will adjust itself based on supply and demand. So I think my ideal would be to see us abandon what we've got, go through a middle stage of what you're talking about, which would be so much more accurate. That would be stage 2. I'll bring that up in a minute. And then ultimately move to, just like the weather, where no matter how good our formulas and technology is, if we start trying to control the weather, I mean, they already are, and it's a disaster. It's not, in the long run, it's not going to work. Just my opinion. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm going to try to keep this brief, but I have 3 main points.
And your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Michelle Marie Engel, and on this book that I'm going to give you in Kimberly, it says Michelle Marie Angel, because that's what the name means. Okay. And this book is called It's a New World After All, Poetry and Prose to Inspire a New World Vision. And as architects, I think that everybody in this room, if we all realized one thing, and that is where we place our attention, that's where our energy goes. So if we take our attention off money, because we've been tricked into thinking that money is the middleman and we need money for everything, well, let me tell you, we're in a consciousness revolution, and our attention generates energy into what we're creating. So we need to focus on solutions, be solution focused, be part of the solution and not the problem. And I do want to say that I'm a teacher, and I think that teaching by example is the best thing. So I'm creating a new education. It's called Follow Your Heart Inspiration Education. And
It's called what?
Follow Your Heart.
Follow Your Heart, okay.
Inspiration Education. And it's under a whole umbrella project I'm doing called the Alchemy of Light Project. I'm publishing 56 books, 6 education programs, 12 events, and 12 videos. The next event is on April 19th, and it's called The Rock of Spiritual Perception. And if we can perceive the truth and focus on this clear vision, it could be utopia, it could be anything we desire, but we're going to learn our own powers as souls. We are the technology, and
Wow.
we have energy that is magnified and amplified. And if I could talk to Nassim, I could tell him my personal experience of the singularity.
Yeah.
I was in meditation one day, and I was very, very deep, and I was in this situation where I was a single parent. You know, I had to transcend a lack of money situation because I was getting my teaching credential transferred to the state, so I couldn't use that yet. And when I was in meditation, I suddenly found my center, which is a black hole, and I rejoiced out of meditation. I said, oh my gosh, God is a dot. That's like the one dot, the one black hole that we all have in common, and that's our connection. So using in actual reality, our consciousness to connect and focus on solutions, I think that rapid changes can happen very, very fast. And this is just a primer and a little bit of example of what I'm up to that I'm going to give to you. And if anybody's in the area, Hidden Springs Wellness Center on April 19th from 5:44 to 6 o'clock, we're going to talk about the rock of spiritual perception.
Would you be willing to read one brief poem from the book?
You know what? I have to.
I could feel that.
I was going to ask you to read it, actually. This is for everybody, and this is through me, not from me, but it's truly for you. It's called Love's Team. If you would like to live your dream, here's an invitation to join Love's Team. It's your energy that helps tilt the world toward peace. The direction of your attention can make love increase. Look inside, right down to your core. Feel the love and love yourself more. Sparkles of your energy intermingle with the whole. Your compassion is powerful as you radiate your soul. Love's Team is now strengthening, and I mean right now, and growing as we each surrender to life and join with its flowing. The joy that we feel creates a life of ease. We realize we can create whatever we please. What pleases you? Have you thought lately? Do what you love and increase your joy greatly. Imagine your job in this life that you live is just to make yourself happy by all that you give. Since we're all one, love flows always. Loving yourself brightens all of our days. And when we love others by being kind, we love our whole self. We're no longer blind. Welcome to Love's Team. Your energy is flowing. Your soul is shining brightly. Really, you're glowing. We've bonded so sweetly in our new vibration. It's a global love that's uniting every nation.
Ah. Could you sign that for us? You did? Thank you very much. I appreciate it deeply. I just want to say a couple of brief statements about the arts, because the arts is one of our 13 sectors, and I cannot overstate how critical the arts are. You know, the arts are getting dropped out of schools, and you know, people are in such financial desperation in many cases that they don't have time to do their art and so forth. When we were making Thrive, which was years of artistic orgasm for me. I got to do the writing and the visuals and the music and the editing. It was just a dream come true for me. And so I got to work with some incredible people, and especially Gary Malkin. Some of you may know him, who did the original score for Thrive. And he told me when we had the final rough cut, he said, "Congratulations, you've done 49% of your film." I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he said, "You'll see. When we're done with the music, it will be more than twice as powerful." And he was absolutely right. So the artists with poetry and with visuals and with music and so forth, I don't need to tell you, but this is just to get it in the space for all of us. It has the ability to open the heart, connect it with the mind, and then motivate people like nothing else. That are not just pure rational logic will take you to a certain level, but it won't do that. Tatanka is here somewhere, right? This incredible musician here who does that for a lot of the gatherings, the activist gatherings in Santa Cruz, where the thoughts are there, the strategies are circulating, and then Tatanka just lights the whole place up. And I know a lot of you are doing that, but thank you for the poetry. That was great. Yes.
I'm Patty Browning, and I just want to say I am so grateful to be a part of this forum this weekend. It's just beautifully presented, and it is so necessary. And I came up here specifically for something, but my heart has been open to another thing. One thing I'd like to clarify, though, is in 2004, I went to Boston with Dennis Kucinich as a progressive because it was very important to me to have that evolutionary shift in politics take place, and I wanted to be a part of it. The progressives were caged. We were actually not allowed, near the convention center, and we were not allowed to hold up any placards of any kind. I was in good company. Amy Goodman was part of that, the Friends. Why I am stepping up here is to say there needs to be a clear distinction in something that has been intentionally buried, and that is the progressive platform. If I remember correctly, yesterday I raised my hand as an independent because progressive is not even acknowledged. I did not raise my hand as a liberal, but as a progressive. And so we're seeing it again, how the progressive ideology is being churned up to be a part of a liberal agenda, and it's not that at all, because progressive, for me, is about honoring human rights and the rights of the environment and everything. It's an important agenda. So I hope that we can start really clarifying that when we're talking to people and they want to lump us, together. We're not liberal. A liberal is basically, according to Daniel Sheehan, I believe, it's ensconced in military and economic superiority. That is part of its agenda, and that is not the progressive agenda at all. That said, I just want to respond to what I just heard, because I feel like this is essential. I have been with groups and trying to ferret out ways to go about, creating something and not having clarity about how to do that, and there is almost this frantic rush to get into the agenda. We've got to create agendas, and so I have voiced, let's go into a circle. Let's go into a circle and really each one of us share why we are here. What is our heart's intention of being in this place? And I have not seen it fail, that it doesn't shift the energy completely. There is a clarity that comes from the fact of the allowing of all voices, and also the recognition of what it is that our heart is really calling for, because we're so distracted by what it is that we think we need to do or what it is we don't want. But actually, we haven't been supported in really exploring what is it that we want to create. So I just want to say, this is something that I would like to see discussed more as part of this forum. The technology is wonderful if it is used by the right hearts. You know, if you have this technology that is so extraordinary, you know, or you have this economy that is making so much money, but it is not directed by the intention of the heart, it will lead us to where we are now. So I just see the value of that. And I also see this is what is inherent in creating the new story.
Yeah.
It's the story of the heart.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, obviously the heart is at the very core of all of this. At last year's workshop session like this, I spent quite a bit of time doing a mini version of what we do in our Solutions Summits, where I invited each person to get clear on their purpose in life, which is really what you're saying. What is your heart's desire? What is your intention? And then to choose the sector that they're most drawn to. And then to choose the level of engagement that you're most drawn to. Because a lot of people say, you know, I'm just one person, you know, what could I possibly do? Once you're clear on that, you are a force of nature. I mean, every single person in this room was the winner of a swimming race, a deep ocean swimming race against 60 to 100 million other competitors. So I know who you are. But it really helps because we get kind of indoctrinated out of this clarity of purpose in our society to get the purpose, to get the sector, to get the level of engagement, get the issue. Then when you join with other people to collaborate, you're bringing this incredible clarity and presence to the group. You know you're on purpose, and I think that I don't think anything in the universe exists except as a function of purpose. And who we are, our toroidal energy field, we're centered by that heart, that core, that connection to the universe. But then the spin axis is our purpose. And then everything else moves and changes around that in that toroidal dynamic. But I think who we are is purpose itself. So thank you for bringing that up. I want to take just a moment to get this into the conversation. And these are the three stages of transition, because when we talk about, this freedom thing sounds nice, but how would we ever get there? We don't know the answers to that, but we laid out in Thrive 3 stages. Not to be coerced, though that would be easier in the beginning because there would still be government, but what we think is arising naturally. And the first one is bringing integrity to the current systems and helping those most in need. So the current power structures are there, and our challenge is to bring as much integrity as possible to them, to the political leadership and so forth, while they're there, and in my opinion, while we're phasing out the authoritarian structure where some people have rights that other people don't have. But that's stage 1, and for me, as we were designing this, the person I had in mind was Dennis Kucinich. He's certainly one of the most brilliant and enlightened politicians I've ever met. And in terms of helping those most in need, while we're transitioning to a free society that's naturally prosperous, you've got a lot of people who don't have health care, they don't have housing. You know, we've got a drastic transition back to organic farming that needs to happen, and that needs subsidies. But rather than creating new theft in order to do that, bring more integrity to our current systems, cut the military budget in half, we're still outspending any country in the world, and eliminate the Federal Reserve, and you would have, at that time we calculated, and it would be even more now, $1.3 trillion a year freed up that would handle all of that transition, not only here but around the world. So that's phase 1. That's more the progressive phase, because I think that that empowers the compassion of progressives. I was raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, in almost an entirely conservative, kind of classical conservative Republican community. And there were a few people, like I had one grandmother who was a closet Democrat. And And she would take me aside and say, listen, I know this is really a strong conversation, but I really think Roosevelt was great when he did this stuff. And so that gave me, at least there was a window open in my paradigm house. Then I moved to California, and all my friends were liberal progressives, just about. And so I really got to experience those worlds. And when I go back there, and in either, in somebody's living room or in a large group like this, it's shocking because they're just as good a people as you and I are. And they are just as passionate, and they dislike you as much as you dislike them. The ones who are not waking up to a larger conversation but just trying to win this polarity. And that's the polarity that I think we've been duped into. That's exactly the divide and conquer thing that allows them to control us and steal our money while doing whatever they want with the money. So we need to transcend that. So stage 2 is shrinking government to the protection of individual rights and the commons. And the person I had most in mind for this was either Ron Paul or Mary Ruwart. And I've talked a lot about this already, so I won't go into that, but now we're shrinking down the taxation, but individual rights is at the core of it all, and making sure that we're stewarding the commons. And then I firmly believe that this is happening already. Like I pointed out yesterday, that it's already happening in terms of independent security, independent dispute resolution, independent alternative currencies, peer-to-peer markets. This is happening all over the world, though it's not reported much at all by the mainstream media. And the third and final phase, and I think the phase we're going to need to reach to survive as a species, is a society of voluntary association and truly free markets, rules but no rulers. So that's the transition that I think can happen, is happening already, and the clearer we are on the core moral argument that it's not okay to initiate force, fraud, or theft except in self-defense, real self-defense, the clearer we are on that as the moral foundation for a sustainable humanity, the more we can navigate these interim phases with patience and with a sense of direction, as if we're sailing to Hawaii rather than just going out into the ocean and tacking every which way. You get lost and die very quickly that way. Okay, next question.
My name is Shady Sirotkin.
Janie?
Shady.
Shady, all right.
Yeah. Foster, first of all, I just want to thank you for being here and sharing everything that you and your wife have done.
You're welcome.
I had a couple requests initially, but the longer I've stood here, the more questions I have. So I think I'm just going to throw a few things out, and then you can respond to whatever you feel. I'm particularly interested in Mexico because I have some association there, and some of the things that you spoke about yesterday were really fascinating to me. I'd love to hear more about that. Also, last night in some of the conversation, there was the talk about the dragon families and that, and I think that would be, I would love to hear a lot more about that. Okay. And also, some of your comments about Trump sort of really, changed my, just blew the sort of windows out of some of my thinking. Then I guess also one of the things, as I'm standing here, I've been thinking about the roles of leadership, modeling, and education versus the authoritarian figures, that you've talked about. We don't need these authorities. But obviously, there is a need for, like what you were doing, educating, modeling, and leadership roles. So just where you see that as a role. Also, I think for myself...
I don't think we're going to have time to... I think we're going to need to pick one of those,
okay,
given there are people behind you in line. So I love your comprehensive thinking. But raise your... let's say between Mexico, Dragon, and Trump. Raise your hand for Mexico. Okay? Raise your hand for Dragon. Raise your hand for Trump. Okay? Well, we're going to go with majority rule, at least to start on this one.
Okay, and can I just make one other quick comment?
Yeah.
I love what we're doing here this weekend. I'd like to see this continue yearly and have a continued conversation. And I'd like to see the youth be promoted, so I thought that there might be a program we can set up to help fund some hotel rooms where people can come from a distance and crash in the hotel room, and maybe some scholarships.
Please use the feedback form
Okay.
at the end of the conference.
Great.
To articulate how you think we might do that.
Okay, great.
Not just the idea of it, but how to do that.
Okay,
Thank
yeah,
you very
thank
much.
you. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, let's make sure that you get there before we have to end. At least one representative. Okay, so raise your hand if you've heard about, know something about the Dragon Family Alliance.
Only because you've told us online.
No, okay. All right. Raise your hand if you're holding some alternative currencies that they're looking to support, okay? The ones with their hands up have their hopes up. Okay, so the short course in this, because there's still a significant amount of people who don't know, is that we're kind of taught that the wealthiest people in the world are the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and they're obviously very wealthy. Their wealth doesn't come close to the Dragon Family Alliance. It's a minuscule percentage. In fact, they've been borrowing most of their money for the last 100 years from the Dragon Family Alliance. And this is one of the best kept secrets in the world, but it's starting to come out now. The Dragon Family Alliance is an ancient league of royal families. You know how I feel about royalty. So Kimberly and I had to be careful when we finally met them to respect them as human beings and not get caught up in royalty, really? Does being that rich make you like king or something? So we restrained ourselves pretty much. Anyway, this is essentially the countries of China, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And they have been collecting, mining, stealing, hoarding gold for centuries, if not millennia. And so when world wars started and so forth, they really had to make sure that that was well hidden. And so they hid it in troves all over those countries. And when Thrive came out, we were contacted about 6 months after the premiere by a representative of the Dragon family. And somehow his letter got through. We were receiving over 1,000 communications a day, and I was getting to read maybe 10%. But this one somehow got through, and it wasn't even sent to the right email address. It was like a made-up email address, but somehow it got through. And it was a really responsible letter by this guy who was a successful CEO, inventor, investor, many patents and so forth. So it was a very credible letter. He said, I know you're not going to believe this, so go check out my history, check out my patents and so forth. So we thought, okay, this guy looks real. So we ended up going into conversation with him. He started educating us about this story, and he said this will be hard to believe, so start reading a book called The Gold Warriors. And if you haven't read that, this is an absolute page-turner. If you don't have the time for the whole thing, it's a historical, factual account, but in the first 30 or 40 pages, it summarizes the whole thing. So read that for sure. And then if you like reading all the details, it's like a James Bond novel, except it's true. So I was reading this when I went back with my videographer, our security guy, and my buddy Danny Sheehan to check out a free energy lab in Kentucky. This turned out to be one of our ultimate kissing the frog incidents, where the guy was a complete fraud. And we spent thousands of dollars on this trip taking everyone. But we've kissed a few frogs along the way, and we found a lot of valuable stuff. So anyway, I'm sitting at dinner. I'm reading this book on the airplane going, oh my God, I can't believe it. And this is just the story of Japan, what's called the Yamashita's gold. And so I'm reading this and just completely in this world. At dinner that night at a friend's house, we're all together, and Danny's sitting there, and all of a sudden he starts talking about Yamashita's gold, and this guy, Robert Curtis, who's the main American who was involved in everything, and my jaw just dropped. I said, so you know about the Dragon family and the gold? He says, oh yeah, I was involved in that. So the credibility went way up for me instantaneously. And so he told me a few stories that totally validated this thing, and he helped them secure the treasure maps when the original Japanese prince died. He wanted to pass it on to someone, and the only person that he trusted to pass it on to was his valet, who was Filipino. I think his name was Ben. And he had hired this guy as a teenager, and he had sworn to his father, I will protect your son with my life. So when they finished burying the Japanese gold before the end of World War II, they got all the workers who had helped transport the gold and bury it. And, it's in over 100 football field-sized underground troves. And they got all the workers together as a celebration of completing the job. And then the royalty left, and then they dynamited the entrances and killed everybody who knew where the gold was. So it sounds kind of, again, it sounds like a bad B movie or something like that, except that it was true. And so this Japanese prince took Ben, his valet, out with him because he had made this pledge. And Danny knows these folks and can validate that. But anyway, I don't want to get too caught up in the details of this, but it looked very real to us. So we started into conversation with some representatives of different dragon families. We were ultimately approached by 13 different representatives of different families. Some of them we felt good about, some of them we didn't. And so we ended up working especially with 2 different ones. And so we're speaking about twice a month on encrypted lines with 1 or 2 of the head guys over there of the Chinese faction. So Kimberly and I are on the phone hearing all these amazing things and finally said, this is a fantastic story. It would be a dream come true if you really have this intention to save the environment, rescue the global economy and so forth, but how do we know that you're real? And they said, well, that's a really understandable question, and until you actually meet us, the best thing we can offer is, because most people in China and Japan do not know who these people are. They keep it very secret for obvious reasons. And so they said, well, the best we can do is tell you what's going to be happening in the world on a major scale that we're going to be behind, and then you see whether or not it happens. I'm like, okay, what's first? And they said, well, we're shutting down the Federal Reserve's ability to print money. I'm like, what? So when's that going to happen? Real soon. Just keep watching the news. 2 weeks later, Ben Bernanke makes his announcement at the end of quantitative easing, and they haven't started it up since, and I don't think they're going to, because they were disenfranchised by the Dragon family, from whom the Federal Reserve, the IMF, and the World Bank have been borrowing basically their money since 1913. And so next time we talked to them on the phone, it was like, okay, that was impressive. How did that go down? And they said, well, of course, they didn't like it at all. They begged us to go to the World Court and declare bankruptcy. And we told them, listen, we loaned you this money in order to save the environment and for humanitarian purposes. You've done exactly the opposite. You've screwed over the entire world. You're destroying the environment, and you haven't paid back any of the money. The biggest tranche of the money that was supposed to be paid back was due on September 12th, 2001. And the paperwork was in the basement of Building 7. What a coincidence. And that story goes on and on too. There was gold in the basement of the Twin Towers and all that. But so they haven't paid this back. So basically they got cut off, disenfranchised. Obviously the Federal Reserve hasn't shut down, but it's basically powerless. They talk about tweaking the interest rates a quarter. They can't raise the interest rates any significant amount because all their own banks will be instantly out of business. So they're caught. The only strategy that they have left is going to war, and they've tried it numerous times, but fortunately it's all been stopped so far, or going along with the standing offer from the Dragon families to become a partner with the rest of the countries of the world in a global asset-backed financial system rather than trying to dominate the world. And so that's the challenge. And they agreed to it numerous times. And then right at the last minute, Jack Lew, the Secretary of the Treasury, really wanted to do this and has said it publicly in many pretty obvious ways. But Obama, in my research, has always been an operator, a puppet for the Rockefeller cartel. So at the last minute, he would pull it out. Literally, they would fly to Reno. The Dragon family would fly in there. And then at the last minute, oh, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to do it. There's a problem. So they pulled out. And finally, the Dragon family just said, okay, we can't do this with you. So I'm getting ahead a little bit. Back to their proofs. To make a long story short, they told us that they were going to create the BRICS Alliance, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Shanghai Gold Exchange, and then ultimately, when they were trying to release the money again and again, it kept getting either stolen or people got poisoned or killed. And so they told us, okay, we've pulled back. We're going to have to create our own global electronic money transfer system as an alternative to the SWIFT system. And once again, it was like, whoa, that's a big deal. The Federal Reserve runs money transfer worldwide. And so sure enough, a year later, both China and Russia launched their own systems. And so everything is in place now. And they last time that I had talked with them, they said that they were waiting until, they waited till Obama was gone, and then they're waiting until Trump has seated his cabinet, particularly all the financial advisors, secretary and so forth. And they have told me, I can't confirm that this is true, but they haven't lied to us yet, anything that we've found. They told us that Trump is read in on this entirely and on board with it, which would make sense to me because fundamentally he and his advisors are at their core anti-globalists. There's a lot of problems with them, but this is the first presidency to be genuinely anti-globalist probably since Andrew Jackson or something, at least since Woodrow Wilson. And Trump is basically a deal maker. I think he wants to win. He actually wants people to succeed, but he's not I don't consider him to be a principle-based operator. But he, I felt that way about all the other presidential candidates too. So he's not in a category by himself. And I think he's actually done more to pull us back from the brink of a global totalitarian state with the TPP and auditing the Fed and the mandatory vaccines. And I could go on in that list. And then I've got a whole negatives list as well, because he doesn't have the core non-aggression principle. What divides the things I like about him from the things that I can't stand about him is over here he's honoring non-violation, and over here he's violating like crazy, including the pipeline and the environment, all this stuff. But anyway, supposedly he wants to go along with this, and he's got a huge ego, and he's the ultimate deal maker. This would be the biggest deal in human history. So what I've been told literally in the last 2 weeks is that it's already starting. It's starting with sovereign nations, then it will go to private groups. Some of you may be in private currency groups who've already made contracts and don't actually have to wait for a particular currency value. And then the global currency reset, I'm convinced, will happen, and probably this year. It has to happen. The currencies are so out of balance. And the pound and the dollar and the euro, I think, will drop substantially. If the U.S. goes along with the Dragon family, I think it'll probably drop 30%. If they don't go along with it, we'll be isolated from the rest of the world, probably drop 70% and be a financial catastrophe the like of which we've never seen. But I think we will go along. Every other country in the world except Israel and Japan has agreed to this new system and has already installed their software in their banks. So there's a lot of momentum moving forward for this, and it's a huge step. There's problems with it. I think interimly there's going to be a large factor played by the SDRs and the World Bank and that type of thing. It's a move in some ways toward the global cashless currencies that I've warned about in Thrive. But at the same time, it's way better than fiat money and fractional reserve banking. It's going to save us in that way, but we need to be very careful of the next phase. And we've talked intensely. Ultimately, after we'd seen all this evidence, it's like, oh, okay, we get that you guys are real. We know the gold is real. What's next? And they said, we'd like you and Kimberly to come to China and meet with us. So we did, and a week-long trip turned into a 3-week trip, and it was a complete mind-blower. I'm a pretty informed guy because I spend, half of every day just trying to keep up. But I was in kindergarten with these folks because they're not reading it online. They're at the very core. When I met the number 2 guy in the entire structure, and he he said, oh, Hillary was just here raising money for her campaign. And I said, really, what did she ask for? And they said $1 trillion. And I said, what did you say? And he said, no, you're part of the cabal that has been destroying it and not paying the money back and so forth, and we can't support you anymore. And they said, then the Pope was there supposedly, had been asking for money as well. And so we ended up spending this time with them, and I've got just notebooks full of it. They were really teaching me about how it really works. And Kimberly and I did a presentation for them on the top 70 of our projects in the Thrive Connect realm that I was touching on the other day. And at the end of it, they said, congratulations, we've been following you since the movie came out. We're proud that you did good research. You were accurate as far as you went, and we're teaching you the rest of the story. And that the fact that you had the courage to do that and to build a global trustworthy solutions network is our dream come true. That's one of the reasons why they'd like to work with us, because they've got all the money, but they're not trusted. And in working with us, it would help build their trust. But we made it very clear to them, until we have actually worked with you and seen that we can trust you and seen how you're distributing these funds, we don't want to work with the next lender of last resort who's going to own everybody with a whole new debt system. They promise us that that's not what they have in mind. So anyway, we'll feel our way into that, but at the end of it, they said this is the best presentation that we've seen, and we'd like to fund all of those projects, and that'll be just the beginning. That'll be the first 2 years. So, we've learned not to hold our breath for that. There are others of you who are out there waiting for Dragon money also. I think that it's real. I have no idea when it's going to happen, but I think that we will see the global currency reset, and countries like Vietnam and Iraq, even Zimbabwe, their currency will skyrocket, and then countries that have already devalued, like Russia and China, they're about where they want to be already in realistic kind of mark-to-market type of valuation of their currency. So it's a tremendously exciting possibility. When we were making Thrive, I had 3 major prayers. The first was that we would survive till the end of the movie. The second was that the internet would survive so the movie could spread worldwide. And the third was that there would be some force, either extraterrestrial or planetary, that would be more powerful than the Rothschild-Rockefeller banking cartel. But that was a wing and a prayer. For me, I had no idea. And then this shows up. So we will keep you posted as we can. There's a lot that I can't say about them, but obviously I've got a few blogs and online webinars about this topic. I know we have some people in line for questions, but let me take it. Does anybody in line have a question about the Dragon family? Okay. Did anyone here have a question about that? Yeah. Well, my research matches your channeling, so I guess that's some kind of cross-reference.
That's why I had to say it, because I did this not knowing anything about this.
Okay, great. One more?
So, if all this transition happens, and I keep seeing buzz on the internet all the time about look out for this year.
You stand up so that you get on the video.
I keep seeing buzz on the internet about some major thing with the currency happening this year. What does that mean for those of us that are just living paycheck to paycheck, and how do we survive? I mean, what happens?
You mean you're living paycheck to paycheck and have currency that you're waiting for, or just wondering what's going to happen in the world?
Well, it's like if the $600 I get a week doesn't go anywhere. I mean, if it's devalued to the point, I mean, what happens? I mean, it's like, are we dealing with the collapse that we've all been waiting for?
Very potentially, yeah. Our best way out of that collapse, because the stock market's up, the dollar's up, and so forth, and all that's just fake money that's been pumped in and goes directly to the banks and then goes directly to the corporations, and it doesn't reflect real value. And so if the U.S. goes along with the rest of the world and the dollar drops, let's say 30%, in the long run, I mean, it's going to be a difficult transition, but in the long run, it's better to have 70% of something than 100% or 30% of worthless. And it could happen here because the way it's been pumped up, just like the Deutschmark was and the Zimbabwe dollar and all that kind of stuff. But I think that if a lot of this currency comes into the world, they've told us very clearly they're not just going to dump quadrillions or octillions or something into the world. It would devalue everything. It's like the De Beers diamond market. They've got literally warehouses packed with diamonds. So they put them into the market gradually so that they still have some value. And they would do a similar thing with the gold so that it will increase the ultimately wealth for everyone. More people are going to have money to spend. That means more startups. It means more jobs. So that will raise things. But in the interim, 30% drop in the stock market could be very difficult. So to whatever degree you can, I recommend to everyone that you store some food. Have some kind of precious metals in hiding somewhere, but especially know your neighbors. Have a community that could band together and help each other through a difficult transition.
Foster, we have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
And please, anyone at the microphone here, make your question very succinct.
Yeah, I think we can follow up after, but I think we need to go to these questions because they've been patiently waiting in line for an hour.
Hello, my name is Curtis Kidwell with Bullseye Media, and I'll keep it short. And we are continuing the dialogue at the lunch break and dinner break and our video camera out here. We'd love to have you come share your experience at the conference there. This is some crushing topics, in my opinion, right? The Zeitgeist film rocked my world. Your film rocked my world. But the dialogue is happening, and that's very exciting. I'm from Texas. I go back to Texas. I try to have this dialogue. Those are fighting words, right? My children, are 14. And I'm just now thinking I can show them your movie. Telling them your government is trying to kill you and showing them examples of that is some pretty sobering stuff that I'm not sure they're ready yet, right? But
The oldest is how old? 13?
Yeah, we have 2 that are 14 and 2 that are 17 and 18.
In general, we've been recommending to wait till 16 unless your children are very advanced already in terms of this type of thinking or simply very mature.
Thank you. So I'm stuck between 2 places. 1, I'm a free man in a free society, one of the greatest nations on earth. 2, I'm a slave in an economic system that's rigged against me, right? I'm an entrepreneur, I've been all my life. I'm making a documentary about the extraterrestrial disclosure movement. Thank you, Daniel, for starting your whole presentation with that. Stephen is here, Bassett is here as well. This is the right dialogue to be having. I struggle with just being ground down by all of it, the weight on my shoulders. Trying to do what we're doing just seems monumental. So really my question boils down to how do we keep, 1, our concern for safety, right? If we're going to start bringing this dialogue into the world, you're saying, well, they'll kill you if you're a doctor. They'll kill you if you're this. If I'm going to put a documentary film into the world that's about some of this subject matter, do I fear for my family's safety? Is it a prudent, reasonable person, action? 2 is every day just getting up. How do we maintain the optimism and the hope, of these crushing topics? Does that make sense?
Yeah. All right.
And I would definitely love to hear about how we get more young people in the room. Thank
you. In terms of your risk, I would advise being very careful. It's one of the riskiest topics because it will dramatically change the power structures, as Danny laid out. But it'll also, as we said in Thrive, if it's acknowledged that they're here, a lot of people are going to be going, how'd they get here? And where's that technology? And then they're going to find out the government's had it for quite a while, and they're going to be really pissed off. So they go to great lengths to protect this one. I don't know if you know of the name David Crowley, but he's a filmmaker who made a film called Gray State. And when we were making Thrive, we could have made a lot of money on a theatrical release. And our security people said, don't do that. And we really took that very seriously. And so we'll never know for sure whether the movie would have gotten shut down or something would have happened to us. Our most dangerous time was between the trailer, when we basically laid out everything that was going to be in the film, and the actual premiere. It was already on over 1,000 hard drives around the world, so ultimately they couldn't stop it once it was done. But we released it on one night in 10 languages on the internet for security reasons. And this David Crowley was an Army veteran who was seeing through all of what's going on and made a really powerful film about it. It was a combination dramatic film. We'd already moved into the police state, and this was people trying to survive in the U.S. police state. And then he would cut to people like Alex Jones and others who were very informed about that kind of stuff. So it was a docudrama in that way.
Was he killed?
Yeah, he was killed.
Yeah.
He and his wife and his daughter, his 5-year-old daughter, before the film came out. And he had just, they said, oh, he was, depressed by the subject matter and not sure he could finish his film. He'd just been offered $30 million to finish the film by a Hollywood studio. And he was, was in love with his wife and clearly a highly intentioned guy. So this security stuff, whether it's in the ET field or the energy or the health, even in agriculture, almost everything except the environment right now. I mean, it's got its risks, but it's more universally acceptable that we all need an environment to survive. So I would recommend that you take precautions, to talk to somebody or you can talk to Kimberly and me later. We can pass on a lot of what we learned from the experts. And just be very careful. The moment it's out on the internet, then you're safe. It's much safer, let's put it that way. So I just take precautions, even if you won't know whether or not it was necessary. The key thing is that you're still alive and doing great work. I think we need to go on to the next one.
Foster, we got time for one last question. I've asked the young man here to be the last, and I really appreciate you allowed that courtesy. So, thank you.
And the other, there's 2 or 3 people who didn't get their questions answered. I invite you to come up to me after or on a break or something like that, and I'd be happy to interact with you.
So, Derek Barber, representing team 18 to 35, and
yay!
Brother behind me, 25-year-old, and thank you to the gentleman behind me that allowed me to go ahead of him. I'm in a very unique position because I've been studying socio-political organization for almost 10 years now. I knew of the philosopher that you referenced yesterday when only a few thousand people in the world knew who he was. And gentleman Sheehan, I have a sweetie in Standing Rock right now who's providing medical services. So I understand the full spectrum. What I'm proposing, if I may so boldly, you said we don't know. We may, and the answer may be bioregionalism, which you brought up on the panel yesterday. The rules, the principles, the laws exist in nature, and I know we don't have time to get into it now, but there are potential solutions. The reality is there's a bidirectionality between humans and nature, and we're in a very interesting place in human history where we can create nature, and we can't help but be unconsciously, physiologically affected by our environment, which we can create now. See Nassim's work. So what I'm proposing is that there may be a theory akin to Nassim's theory connecting the subatomic level with the cosmic level, and I'm proposing that it might be bioregionalism with regard to socio-political organization. And in addition to that, I have ideas for projects like the 35 or so that you're considering to facilitate that transition, because it might be an intergenerational project. Absolutely. And I'm a health and fitness professional, and one of the realizations that I've came to is that you can't necessarily, if you feel like someone has the potential to get here and they're here, it can be a violent thing to do this, right? And sometimes it needs to be incremental, and I've learned that the hard way. So if it is indeed an intergenerational project, call it homeostasis, bioregionalism can be the potential solution. A conscious fragmentation with still a neural network, a network of a conscientiousness. Bioregional nodal collaboration is the 3-word idea of what I'm referencing.
Okay.
So
Great.
I think it may be possible, and
Yeah,
we need to
I
talk
want
more
to
about
agree
it.
with you 100%. And fortunately, what I see going on in the world right now is that we were on the brink of a global totalitarian state. And what's going on with the emerging collapse of the European Union, and even in this country looking more to states' rights, I think this centralization of power, people are catching on, and they're pulling back to national sovereignty, and then to state sovereignty, and then to local sovereignty. And ultimately, I think it can't help if we survive. It's going to continue all the way to individual sovereignty. But organizing, I mean, you can trade ideas and even goods to some extent, all over the world. But this bioregional communities are absolutely the organic solution to actually being in touch with the human beings that you're collaborating with. So I love that you're into that, and let us know how we can help.
Societies are shaped by values, and values are shaped by nature. There's a bidirectionality between the two. One woman brought up the idea that we have to change the minds that create the system. It has to be both. There's a bidirectionality. You have to change the system. And so if I had a question, my question is, do you think that the state, as in its current iteration, is that an industrial complex too? Is there a political industrial complex? And are we suffering the ill health effects of that?
One word, absolutely. It's the source of it all. These authoritarian complexes can't exist without our believing in the state. Larkin Rose, one of my philosophical heroes, wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition that lays this out so beautifully. He says, the most dangerous thing in the world is not the banking cabal, the military industrial complex. It's our belief that that some centralized power should be ruling us.
Absolutely.
It's the only reason they survive. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Foster. Well, once again, Foster rocks the room here. So thank you so much for that.